You're listening to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michelle Lawrence, and I've had the opportunity to interview many of those who are making a difference at the intersections of yoga and health. And I'm here to share with you their stories and conversations. Thanks for listening. In today's episode, I interviewed Courtney Brame. Courtney is a dedicated yoga teacher, a yoga therapist in training, and the insightful founder of Something Positive for Positive People, known by the acronym SPFPP. Courtney's work provides crucial guidance for individuals navigating the often isolating experience of stigma, which is a journey deeply informed by his own experiences. Courtney also has his own podcast, SPFPP, and he's also the co-author of the book, Fundamental Concepts and Critical Developments in Sex Education. And we're thrilled and honored to have Courtney as a student in the Inner Peace Yoga Therapy Certification Program. And I'm delighted to be speaking with him today. It's so great to be in conversation with you, Courtney.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Maybe we can just start by having you share a bit about your story and how you came to start SPFPP and how did you come to yoga and then now yoga therapy. Take us on that journey.
Okay. Well, in 2013, I think I was about a year or two into a new job. I graduated college, got my first big boy job, and thought I knew what the rest of my life would look like. I remember waking up on one Saturday morning in 2013, and I was sick, I was cold, I was hot, I had chills, fever, and I ran out or stumbled my way to the bathroom. And at the bathroom, I touched my genitals when I went to go pee, and I had what I later learned was my first herpes outbreak. So after having had those symptoms, went to the doctor, and immediately he just looked and he was like, yep, looks like herpes. So I got checked and tested for the other STIs. I was treated in the event that I was exposed to chlamydia, gonorrhea. I was given a pamphlet and sent on my way. So it was after that I checked in to see if anyone that I was most recently sexually active with had herpes either. And everybody said no. So my initial response was a sense of relief because it was like, oh, great. Like, I don't have to worry about being known as a person who's going around here giving people herpes. And so once I got the information back from those people, everybody said no. It was just kind of like, now what? So I remember searching to see how to navigate symptoms or how to deal with just not having outbreaks or how to minimize the risks of exposure. And in that, what it said was mainly three things consistently between nutrition, stress management, and working out. So I had the working out part down, and I was living with my grandmother after I got my first job. And she was always cooking, and you know, grandma's cook. And in addition to that, like I wasn't responsible over what was going in my food. And so between those two things, I had to make some dramatic changes. I got a personal trainer and a nutritionist, and we had worked together on looking at what I was eating and making the changes from there. And then the only thing that was left really was the management of stress. So the stress management piece is where yoga came in. And that's when I began practicing. I started at my local gym. It was at Gold's Gym. And I was going twice a week. It was like a body flow class is what it was called. And after going to a few of those classes consistently, like I learned that yoga was not just stretching. I learned that it wasn't just holding a squat. I learned a little bit more about it because there was something that happened one day at work where I did not want to go. I didn't want to go to yoga class, but I was like, I'm going. Something told me to go. I was really angry when I got there. And after going through the class, I couldn't even remember what it was that made me angry. And so after that, I was like, oh, there might be something in this. And shortly after, I ended up moving. And when I moved, I was looking for consistent yoga classes again. And the gym that I went to didn't have classes. So I ended up going to a yoga studio. And this was where things got a little bit more in depth for me beyond just the asana practice. There was more emphasis on the breathing. There was more of the philosophy being integrated into the sessions that we were having. And after doing that consistently, I would say through 2017, 18, I ended up moving again. We were talking a little bit about this before we started,
Hmm.
me bouncing around. And I moved back home to St. Louis, Missouri, and the gym that I went to also had yoga classes. So it was here. I was there consistently. And one day, one thing that I liked about the teacher was that she would bring things from her personal life. Like if she was reading something, she'd bring it in and she would kind of center the class around that, sharing some insights and translating it to us through the yoga lens. And there was one day after class, she asked me, she was like, "Hey, have you ever considered being a yoga teacher?" I was like, "Nah," but she let me know that one of the places here in St. Louis offered yoga teacher trainings, and she said I should look into it. So I did, and I went through the training in 2020. In 2021, everything converted online. I completed the 200-hour, and all I learned really was how to put people in poses. That was what stuck more than anything. And I wanted more. So I went into the 300-hour and got more of the philosophy understanding. And some of that really stuck with me. And I didn't really get the opportunity to teach much because it was just, I would try and do virtual classes. And I think by the time we came out of the pandemic, people were over virtual stuff. And what ended up leading me to yoga therapy was I had heard about it. I don't know what sparked it for me, but I learned that there was a difference between yoga teacher and yoga therapy. And I got curious and I started looking at it. And I was like, oh, this looks a lot more interesting to me in a sense of like being able to work with fewer people at a greater quality level because in classes, right, like if there's 20 people there, you say, do this, or you name something. Not everyone can hear you. Not everyone sees what you're doing. Not everyone has that availability or mobility. And being able to give your presence to one or a few people at a time, I think makes for a much more useful practice. Fortunately for me, all of the teachers I had, we had poses that I was able to easily get into. So the attention really didn't need to be on me in regards to that. So it felt like being able to translate this being and presence to one person at a time or smaller groups was something that I became interested in. And so going through Inner Peace, I have really learned to apply yoga to the emotional well-being of people in my work, especially in something positive for positive people, supporting people who are navigating stigma. And I'll stop there because I'll keep.
Yeah, I love your story. I don't know that I've ever heard it in that way of storytelling. And, I've known you for a few years now, but maybe a year. It seems like longer than that. But it was great to kind of get a little walkthrough of that first exposure to yoga and why, and then how it's grown. And I've gotten to witness you grow through the program, and it's been really, really amazing. Tell us about the something positive for positive people part, right? So somewhere along the way in there, you started that too, and now you're bringing the two together. But tell us how that came to be.
Yeah. So I remember something very specific in my yoga teacher training, active listening. And I didn't realize just how powerful this was, but I guess I was doing that without knowing, just in creating a space of hearing people just share their stories with herpes. And so I spent the first 3, 4 years of my diagnosis just kind of navigating life very unconsciously. Some of the things that I did was I prioritized not having herpes outbreaks. I prioritize my relationships in relation to who is okay with me having herpes. And there was really no consciousness there. It was just avoidance of discomfort. And that was just what my narrative was in life. And I think a very cataclysmic happening was when I started to find support groups, dating sites for people who were living with herpes. And it seemed like all my problems just went away. I didn't have to worry about the rejection for that. I didn't have to worry about disclosure or telling people what my status was because of this space. Because when everybody has it, it's like nobody has it, right? And so throughout being in these spaces, I came across a lot of people who have shared very openly they had considered ending their lives because of their diagnosis. And in the beginning, I thought to myself, all right, well, just because you can't find a partner, well, here's this dating site, here's this community. Like, it shouldn't be a problem. And it wasn't something that hit me until a couple of things happened. There was a guy who posted, like, hey, I'm going to do this in one of the support groups. So I was like, huh, that's interesting. So I reached out to the admins in the group and I asked, hey, what are y'all going to do about this? This guy's talking about ending his life. What are you going to do? And they were like, well, we have to organize and wait and see, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, dude, like, if he does this, I'm going to feel bad. So I reached out to him. I looked on his Facebook page and scrolled through a little bit, and I saw that he played guitar. And there was a very distinct difference between when he was playing the guitar and when he stopped. And then there was this. So I asked him, I said, hey, how's it going? And just started a conversation with him and just kind of reminded him of the guitar. I said, hey, I saw that you played guitar. Like, when's the last time you played? And we started talking about that and got to a point where he was like, yeah, I haven't played in a while. And I don't know where he is now, but this was in 2017. And I realized, I think, in that moment, how important validation of identity was. He got back on the guitar. I know he didn't do it at that point. So my conscience is clear in regards to whatever went on during that time for him. I don't remember his name. I wish I could look and see what he's doing now. But between that and then a woman that I had become friends with, she was in a relationship. She had the life of a very like successful career. She was in her passions and overall seemingly enjoyed her life. And her boyfriend gave the best response you can give to someone who says that they have herpes. She hadn't even had symptoms yet. And so when she told him she had gone to the doctor and they said that she had herpes, he was like, all right, well, if you got it, we got it. Best response you can give. So she and I had become friends because she wanted to be prepared for what could happen to him if he were to have tested positive. And in that, she shared with me that she too had considered suicide because of her diagnosis. And that's when I was just like, whoa, hold the phone. So after learning that this was an experience that she had herself, I was like, well, who else is experiencing this? And I went on ahead and I reached out to some of the support groups that I was in, and I just asked, hey, would anybody be willing to share their experience living with herpes anonymously on a podcast? And I got one person who was willing to share, and as I got that experience, I also I would post those, and then more people want to be involved, and this turned into what became a weekly podcast, something positive for positive people. And since 2017, I interviewed people probably like there were days where I had like 6 interviews, but I just kept it at a frequency of once a week. And every week I release an episode. There's a little gap in there because I was like, I should do something else. And then I just got like snatched back into doing it all over again, but differently. So outside of that gap, the number of episodes tracked is about 400. It's been 8 years, so for 52 weeks, right? If you take out holidays, I'm on par for having a consistent one episode a week. But that's how something positive for positive people, the podcast started. And then over time in 2019, after so many interviews, what I've learned is that there is a huge, like at the intersection of stigma where I think sexual health and mental health are. I started to see that. And then what it made me do was begin to reach out to mental health professionals, sex therapists, sex educators to also bring that expertise onto the platform as a way of giving people more options of how to navigate the stigma of their diagnosis. Because what happens is a person gets their diagnosis and it's not just I have this, but it becomes I am this. And their identity is so interconnected with their sexuality that they lose sight of their identity outside of their ability to have sex with a potential partner. And so I started to raise money to pay for people to get therapy if they're struggling with their diagnosis, especially if they had any suicide ideation. That was how it started.
Yeah. So I think it's so amazing what you did and how it came about. And it's grown from there a bit too, right? So not only are you providing more services of the kind that you had before, that was kind of the inception, but you're bringing more to individuals due to the fact that you're training as a yoga therapist. You want to share about that?
So I think there were about 40 people who went through therapy, like talk therapy virtually or over the phone. And a lot of them, even in our exit interviews, while they got a lot from it, they shared that it really wasn't enough or they needed something more or different. And what we did was we just connected them to have 12 sessions, one a week for an hour. And that was what the agreement was. As I talk to people in one-on-one calls, like they'd say, "Oh my God, this was the most helpful thing," like more than talking to their therapist. Or a lot of people wouldn't even talk to their therapist about their herpes diagnosis. So what I got to see over time was just how powerful, I guess, just being seen and being present with in a safe enough container where someone whose identity is reflected in the presence of the space, the person facilitating it, or the community. I got to see that in action, right? And even in just a 30-minute one on one phone call, right? Someone coming in and just venting or sharing their experience or just like being able to share like some of their deepest, darkest secrets. And I'm not held to like the standards of having to report anything. Like I'm just there listening and then get them to say the thing that they wish they could tell people. And then they go on about their business. And experiencing that, I felt like I needed some sort of a structure or a framework to speak to it, facilitate it. And I think that what yoga therapy did was, especially in all of the philosophies, like diving deeper into the koshas, going into and understanding the gunas, and seeing how yoga therapy has been applied to cancer care, grief, anxiety, and depression, and those specific ways. I think I got to have my own presence in healing modality validated through seeing those. And it was very helpful for me to have like a framework for applying yoga to these conversations
Mm.
as a way of supporting people.
I just love it. So, as you know, I'm like a huge fan of what you're doing. And that's part of why I wanted to have you on the podcast so that you could share it out. And you've just done it really skillfully. Like, I'm just so impressed. And it's such a unique niche, but we'll talk about that later. I kind of want to pick up on this word that you've mentioned a couple of times now. And it's one of the themes that you highlight in your work. And the word is presence. And you write even on your website about your podcast. What began as a podcast to share our stories became a broader movement rooted in one practice, presence. And so tell me what you mean about presence. And I know this is kind of like where yoga has informed your work, I think. And what does it mean to you? And what does it mean in the work that you do?
So it was actually what got things clicking consistently and in alignment was one of my cohort mates had recommended to me. She was picking me up and taking me to class from my Airbnb, and we just had a conversation. She asked me about the book by Napoleon Hill, Outwitting the Devil, and she was like, "You should check it out." Whenever somebody like random tells me to do a thing, I'm not gonna say I always do it, but I investigate it because maybe there's something there. So I downloaded this book, and what stood out to me was in his interview with the devil, right? You can use air quotes, whatever, spiritually speaking, religious speaking, whatever it is that you think about it. Like, I'm the kind of person who takes what's useful and then everything else can go. But the useful part of this was that the devil describes himself as the negative portion of the atom, and God as his opposition, the positive portion of the atom, and they can't take each other over. So one day, I don't know what it was, about 2 weeks ago, I just looked up and was like, wait a minute, an atom has three parts. The neutron, like, where's the neutron in all of this? And so I obsessively, for about 2 weeks, looked up the way that an atom operates. And the way that the atom operates on a microscopic level is very reflective of how stars operate on a macrocosmic level. And in that, I drew parallels. I pulled it up because I wanted to be able to read through it, but the way that the koshas are a metaphor or like a symbol of the structure of an atom in the sense of the proton. Atoms are made up of the proton, neutron, and the electron at the core, essentially. Like these three parts make up the atom. And so if God's the positive and the devil's the negative, also the definitions. I always thought negative was bad, positive was good. But the reality is that negative means absence and positive means presence. And I was like, oh, shoot, I didn't know that. It's great that I have this thing that's been branded something positive for positive people. So when we look at the koshas, the Anandamaya kosha is the proton or purpose. The Vijnanamaya kosha is the neutron, which is the awareness portion of the atom. Like this is where choice happens. This is the intuition, self-awareness. The Manomaya kosha is like your first shell. So with atoms, they have shells where the electrons orbit. The first shell is like lowest energy of I call it like low effort. This is more like where your beliefs are. And that's where the first shell of the atom exists. And then the pranamaya kosha is on shell two, which is like your how. This is, of course, your breath, life force, but it's really your emotions and your system rhythm, so to speak. I guess some examples of it is like this is where your capacity is. So I think about the breath in when we're fatigued, it's really hard. Like we're finding center, and that's where the gunas come in because when electrons are excited, you want to meet them with more tamas, like stillness, in order to balance out the rajas. And there are times where if we become like stagnant, we want to move and incorporate more rajas. And then the Annamaya kosha is the shell three, and this is like visible representation. So I look at it like shell one is your why or your intention, shell two being like your how you go about doing things. Like maybe this is where the yamas or niyamas are, this is where your identity is. And then shell three is like the what, like what happens as a result of what it is that you're doing. And so I've been like really examining this, and that's where divine timing, right? I'm glad that you reached out when you did, because this is the framework of how something positive for positive people is run, and it's how I'm choosing to live my life in a way where, all right, if an atom behaves in this way, it has this many shells, it has this many electrons on each shell, and each electron represents possibility. But I've decided to live my life the same way atoms behave. And it's really aligning understanding what your purpose is. And in my case, like I think generally what atoms attempt to do when the neutron and proton are aligned is to just be a guiding light for other people to recognize their own internal guiding light. And what happens around that is that we begin to attract electrons into our orbit that allow for the expression of our connectedness as awareness to our bliss body or our proton to be more magnetic, to where electrons, opportunities, people, places, things, challenges begin to get into orbit. And on that third shell, there's 18 atoms on the periodic table, can only have up to 18 electrons at a time. And again, this represents like the visible world that we live in, the manifestation of where we are when we're aligned between our beliefs and behaviors. And what the atom does, what's so interesting is the goal is to stabilize. And what yoga and meditation talks about is creating stillness. And the idea of just being still and being so aligned in your behaviors and beliefs and being committed to what your intention is what begins to bring in the experiences that validate that. So what yoga therapy has done and how I've been implementing it into my work is really being very present to my intention. And I look at the spiritual leaders, and that's kind of what they do, no matter where they are, like they're connected to it. So, you can go out, you can drink, you can party, you can dance, you can be in environments that maybe are less intentional, but being able to hold and bear witness to your proton, even just if you hold it in mind or you pause for a breath or you have a consistent routine, what that does is keep you connected to that. And that's really what presence has been. So it's more so like getting people in touch with that part of themselves. And the coaches have given me language that is supported to speak to the atom and vice versa, because people may not always be like spiritually receptive or accepting of this kind of language. I hope that answers your question.
Whoa, it does. And it goes way beyond what I was expecting. Yeah, I was like, okay, are we going to come back around to presence? Oh, yeah, we sure did. And wow, it gave me a little window into Courtney that is fresh and new and way more expansive than I ever knew. Yeah.
So, and what's really cool is, again, this is how stars function. This is how everything functions with atoms, because we're made up of trillions of atoms. So, like, why wouldn't we do what atoms do? And if their goal is being, and because we're constantly brushing up against atoms, and as conscious beings, all we really need to do is choose, right, what belongs in our orbit, what doesn't belong in our orbit. And we're constantly, when we tap into that stillness, we realign our shells. And this is like how atoms and stars behave in a rhythm. And when we have these like traumatic events or cataclysmic events, in my case, like a big breakup, what that did was, for me, like, recognize the incompatibility of an electron in my orbit or atoms colliding and trying to force things. Atoms don't force things, they just attract and bond appropriately. And that's how we get molecules, that's how we get systems and the anatomical structures of education systems, political systems, right? Like, there's a lot more to be learned from atoms. And I think that I've committed to dedicating my life to being able to encourage people to take a look at this and begin to apply it to their own life. Like, I've been sitting over here and like I've drawn pictures of my atom, like where I am as the neutron and what my values and beliefs are, and incorporating a lot of what I've gotten from yoga, the yamas and niyamas, as my core two electrons or guiding principles of how I express myself, the things that I regularly do, being very connected to my identity and just in staying rooted and connected to that. Like, people think that we need to sit and meditate for days on end or 30 minutes, but the reality is that on a cosmic level or the atomic level, like, checking in is like that. So another thing is, and I'm so interested in this and like excited, and it's so new, but electrons are significantly smaller than protons are. So it takes a great quantity of them to draw your awareness away from your purpose. And the weight of the purpose, like, the more stabilized your nucleus is where the neutron and proton are, and then up to two electrons can orbit, the more stabilized and the more in rhythm you are with just being consistent in that, again, the more expressions and experiences you have that align with and validate that. And there's a lot of like the other side of that, probably more than we have time for. But I've looked at this as a way of supporting my work, especially in stigma, because what stigma does is it fragments your identity. And that fragmentation in the electron sphere of space is where we get the negativity. And there's so much power in just pointing people in the direction of, okay, well, who are you identity wise? What is your intention? And just like getting people to, even if it's just through my sharing my existence and living in this way, getting them to kind of go within themselves and begin to see that they have a choice between operating unconsciously from a fragmented place, or begin to identify like, oh, I am whole and this wholeness is something that's within me. I think that that keeps them from, Napoleon Hill uses the word drifting, where you're just unconsciously going through life, and it gives you a sense of choice and empowerment for you to be able to navigate whatever it is that you're able to choose from.
Yeah, and that's so much to the heart of yoga too, going from fragmented to returning to wholeness, right? Like that's the key message for me. And I think you use this other model to describe that language too. And what I'm hearing is that you're bringing the two together, something that really excites you and that you've learned, and that is the universe. And how does that relate to this? And you've made some really cool connections. And I love your excitement and enthusiasm about it. And I expect that I'll be hearing more down the road as you learn more, because that does sound new to you, but not something that is going away for you anytime soon. Let's maybe move on just a little bit and talk about how your work right now is focused on individuals with herpes stigma, but I think it can extend beyond into stigma of other kinds and maybe broader than that too. You know, you talked about identity, like identity is a big one here, and this fragmentation and kind of coming back to your own core. And like that's kind of what I'm hearing in you describe sort of the work, if you will. And that work, I think, has other applications. So maybe just talk a little bit about, yeah, this is where I'm focused. And I could see this also working in other places too. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So when we had to do our case studies for class, I was able to there were 6 people who also had become paying clients. And as I worked with them, it was like, all right, everybody came in because they have herpes and this is how they found me. I had one person who just wanted to move her body more consistently. So that was like unique in itself. But the longer I started to work with people, the more I started to see like their identities show up in different ways. Someone shared that they struggled with relationships, having gotten divorced and wanting to get back out into the dating world on the surface is a herpes thing. But when we look at, okay, are you choosing from a place of, does this person accept that I have herpes? Or is this actually someone who I'm compatible with? Like that's where we got into I never thought about that. And we can take that into the koshas, right? And I think that these were like the biggest parts because it wasn't really the physical symptoms that people had an issue with, but it was that and then their disconnection from their pleasure or their bliss body, right? And in the more we got them to, or I got them to speak to those aspects through those lenses, we were able to just tease out what things were underneath there. And we saw some addiction in some cases. Like I had a client tell me that nobody knows this, but she smokes cigarettes and she's addicted and wants to quit. And I was like, oh, I had no idea that this was something that you dealt with. And I wasn't intimidated by it. I was able to just be curious and ask her, okay, well, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to talk about it? Like, let's look at your identity in relation to the cigarettes. And we were able to really get a lot out of that very unexpectedly, just from the patterns and behaviors, identifying what it is that she really craves from that. And something that I've seen is, bringing presence to this thing that we've so absent-mindedly navigated, like addiction. I recently looked up the opposite of addiction and it was connection. And it was just this looking for connection. It's like, okay, well, what ways do you feel connected? And what ways can we connect that maybe aren't with cigarettes and the process that you have to go through, because she talked about having to sneak off from work and get in her car, drive far away, and then when she became present to what she had to do in order to just get that initial sensation of that, it was like, oh, so you just want to breathe. Okay, so you tell everybody that you're going to be away from your desk for a minute. You check your calendar, you pause all your calls, reorganize your schedule, you sneak off with guilt, you go out to your car, you waste the gas, you start your car, you drive to the park, you get to the park, and then has to walk so far away from the car and then light the cigarette, smoke it, and then now you're worried about how you smell, and then you get back in the car and you repeat you have to do the process backwards, and now you're guilty for wondering like, oh my God, does anybody know? Is anyone finding me out? And when we brought her presence to all of those things, she was like, huh, yeah, this is like, she got angry. She was like, what? Like, what is this? And it went from the guilt to the anger of having her life run by something that was such an inconvenience to her. So this was one way that it was used. Did you want another example?
No, what I'm hearing though is like I don't know that more examples, but what I'm hearing you say in this is that the core issue is stigma, but you're finding so many other applications, whether it's addiction or pain, and showing up for the other person and the ways in which they're disconnected from themselves. We know addiction disconnects. We know that pain disconnects us. You've got a through line that you're, I think, now seeing, and you can use the same yoga therapeutic model that you have to help folks in a variety of ways beyond the initial thing that they're coming in for.
Yes. And it has been such a useful tool to have because oftentimes, like, I'll listen to people and, that's cool, but I don't have anything for them to do. So being able to also give them practices and
Yeah.
explain, okay, well, here's how this is supportive. That is really what's been like able to take the work that I've done, just like through something positive for positive people,
Mm-hmm.
to a new level of usefulness.
That's so great. Well, maybe we can wrap up this really awesome conversation with just a little more insight into you and how you've been deepening your own practice, because we know how important that is. And especially if we're talking about presence, that's a skill that we have to hone, and being able to hold space for other people is so important. And yet we have to start with ourselves and our own practice. So tell us what you do to keep yourself on your path.
I had to look at what I do and become more conscious of it. I've injected a lot more consciousness and intentionality behind my behaviors, behind like my routines, because you can kind of get into an automatic like default of a lot of things, from working out, from what I eat, how I eat, right? And just checking in and really just pausing, creating moments of stillness has been something that has been really life changing for me and keeping me within my own rhythm of being able to be present for other people, and just practicing that myself, practicing those pauses. Like, I catch myself doom scrolling now, like when I'm one thing in and I'm like, what do I need? Or if I'm ready to go to my favorite restaurant around the corner and get some wings, I'm like, am I really hungry? So that has really become what my practice is. If I find myself hearing or listening to a certain kind of music, even, I'm like, what's this doing? But just being more aware and taking notice of what's happening within my body, not just when it's like you're getting out of alignment, but even when things are right to move forward. I talk about like this forward response. So being able to be more present has helped me recognize if I'm triggered or activated. I'm able to take the energy of that and then apply it to something that's supportive of my intentionality. So being able to have this forward response where I'm able to take the energy and respond to things from a place of choice. These things have become a consistent presence practice for myself.
It's so great. It's so great. Well, thank you so much for all that you're doing. And thanks so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, and just sharing more of what you do and who you are with us. So greatly appreciated. If you'd like to learn more about who we are and what we do, visit us at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.